We are ready to begin.
All right. So welcome everybody to the November 28, 2022 meeting of the CB6 Land Use and Waterfront Committee meeting. My name is Majid Abdul Samad, and I am the Vice Chair of the Land Use and Waterfront Committee. I will be chairing the meeting tonight. Sandy McKee is not able to join. This meeting is called to order at 7:04 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez and Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom, and I see some already have. If there's time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Just as a reminder, New York State law does require that all committee board members have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on or your name is not properly displayed, you cannot count towards quorum. For the record, Molly will be taking meeting minutes tonight. Yes, Molly Hollister will be taking meeting minutes tonight. So we will take, actually, let's start with taking attendance by roll call. So Brendan, you will conduct the roll call.
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Majid Abdul Samad.
Present.
Jim Collins.
Present.
Adam Hartke. Okay, Adam is not with us. Molly Hollister. Okay, I do see.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Molly. Okay, thank you, Molly. Don't see your camera on, so you're counted as present, but don't count towards quorum. Sandy won't be with us tonight. Larry Shire.
Present.
Ann Seligman.
Present.
Lou Sapersky.
Yo, Brendan.
Yeah.
At the end of the meeting, I have a question unrelated to the committee, but I'd like to ask you about it if you can take a second when we adjourn.
Yeah, I can stay on afterwards. Sandra Sherrod. Sandro is not present. And Letty Simon.
I'm here and I want to welcome Majed to his first chairing of this meeting, and I wish him good fortune, and we're here to root you on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Just
Okay.
reading your background, very impressive. Majid.
And much like with Molly, you're counted as present, but don't count towards
Yes,
quorum.
correct.
So we do not have a quorum.
All right, so jumping right in with the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. All right, seeing none, seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. And jumping into the meeting minutes, the minutes from last month's meeting, October 26th, were distributed ahead of time by the board office as well. If there's no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting these minutes, you may raise your hands through Zoom. Again, seeing none, the minutes from October 26th meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website. All right, so quick ground rules before we dive in. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's just observe these. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have questions about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks must be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us about technical difficulties or having issues or stating in writing information like an email address that are already on the screen or have been stated. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify them and they can unmute and speak. Lastly, committee members are required by the state open meeting laws to have their Zoom cameras on and first and last names displayed. Again, from the time call to order until adjournment. If you must step away from your computer briefly, you are required to leave your camera on. So with that, jumping into tonight's agenda, we have 4 items on the agenda tonight. Continued discussion of the City of Yes series. I see George James as joining us. Thank you again, George. That was a great discussion from last month, and I already know there's a lot of questions, and I have a bunch also from Sandy, so we'll take those on. We will introduce Manhattan's CB6 Community Planning Fellow, Laureen McCarr, who's with us. Hi, Laureen. And then we'll do a quick discussion on recommendations from the last report that Laureen is building off of, which is a look back at Manhattan's. That's the 197A plan of 2008. And lastly, the chair report, which Sandy was very kind to help me in putting together. So with that, oh, and go ahead. I see your hands raised.
Actually, I'm sorry. I know we did already adopt the agenda, but as you were saying it out loud, it does kind of make more sense to talk about the last fellow's work and then have Laureen build on that. I don't know if other people feel like that makes sense, or Laureen, how do you feel about that?
So actually, in introducing what Laureen's going to be working on, we're just going to do a quick recap of where we last left off, just as a reminder for folks, and where are some of the key themes that we will work on from that report, and then Laureen can jump in. So maybe we'll do it that way, and you can field questions to Laureen, which again, this is still early stages. So there's no full presentation from Laureen. It's really just an introduction today.
No. I just meant you were saying like the agenda order is to do Laureen first and then
the discussion. Let's see.
Never mind.
Yeah,
Don't worry about it.
Let's see what folks feel about it once we get to that. But then I actually want to jump right in with George, having started this conversation and having had to cut a little short last month because we went over time. So just as a reminder, the presentation had covered the series of 3 zoning text amendments proposed by the Adams administration: zoning for zero carbon, zoning for economic opportunities, and zoning for housing. As a reminder, just to the committee, DCP is asking for our comments, and per George's remarks from last month, they're asking us to lead and comment before they put out a proposal. So the earlier we send comments and questions, the better. And we were asked to think about not only what they're saying, but also what they're not saying in these remarks. So George, turning it over to you to start this conversation.
That's a great, perfect introduction. Thank you for that. And you know, to clarify one point is that this is not necessarily formal comments that they're looking for. Because this is completely outside the land use process we're all used to, right? Where there's a very formalized process and form you've got to fill out and all that. This is just like they're putting it out there to say, what did we get wrong? And so you introduced what we went over. You know, just the quick summary of them. Zoning for zero carbon, focused on wind and solar energy production, changes in building bulk for insulation and retrofits, changes to parking regulations for electric vehicles, better stormwater management, which we actually didn't get to because it was essentially about larger tree pits and permeable pavements. It was relatively straightforward. Zoning for economic opportunity, lessening the distinctions between C1 and C2 districts, updating the uses, the use groups, and then simplifying parking and loading requirements. And then zoning for housing opportunity, which, you know, has a lot of parts, but basically higher density for affordable housing and a move away from mandatory inclusionary housing as a strategy, allowing for smaller units, and then easier conversions of non-residential buildings to residential use. Now, there were a couple things that have come out since our meeting. DCP was very kind. I had lots of really in the weeds questions, and they gave me a one-on-one with the designer of this. So I got to ask a ton of questions, and they were very open. They prepared a 28-page deck about zoning for zero carbon. It has been shared with industry and designers, but not the public. I will happily provide this to the board or the committee if you're interested in getting into the details. It's very technical. It gets into the weeds. It's not zoning text, but it really gets into like what the problem is and what the solution is. And a lot of the stuff, especially as it regards energy generation, is very much into the weeds. But what it also did, I went through it, and a couple of things popped out at me, which I think I need to just go over just a couple of things about zoning for zero carbon before we get into the discussion, because it's new. The major change that I'd like to talk about is that all solar, regardless of location, may be commercial solar. All right, so to better understand what that means, you have to understand how it works now. So if you have solar in a residential district attached to a residential building, it must be accessory, which means that it has to serve that building. Yes, you could produce more power and sell it to the grid, but its primary purpose is to serve that building. Commercial solar, however, can feed directly into the grid and doesn't have to serve the building on which it is installed. And that's, I think, a fairly significant change. And, you know, commercial solar, you're used to like seeing these, especially out, you know, in the Hudson River Valley. You might see a bunch of solar farms that look something like this, but this could also be a commercial solar, right? The way it's designed is that you could put these on any building and not serve that building. So the difference may seem esoteric, but I think it's important because it directly impacts on who benefits from the improvement. So these are two different schematics of how a accessory system would work and how a commercial system would work. So you have your solar panel array, power comes into a inverter, and then it feeds into the home or the apartment building, right? This is how an accessory system would work. Now, if there's too much power, it could feed into a battery system, which is I didn't show here, or it goes back into the meter spins backwards, and it goes into the grid. And then if there's not enough power, then the grid feeds into the meter and then into the house, right? So all this stuff behind this line here is what's called behind the meter. This is power generation that never sees the power company's grid, right? It's all behind the meter, as they say. And the beneficiary is whoever pays for the power. And it's usually the tenants that pay for their own electricity. In a commercial system, the panel produces electricity that goes to the AC inverter, which goes to the grid, which goes to your meter, which goes to your home. And the beneficiary there are the landlords and the power company, because the tenants, the people who are paying for the power, still pay for the power. They don't see any direct benefit from this, which, you know, I think is an important difference. Now, there are significant tax benefits, incentives for solar, but that being said, landlords still don't see a lot of direct benefit from accessory solar. And so by allowing commercial solar everywhere, and when I say everywhere, I mean every single New York City zoning district would be allowed, including residential districts. It would incent the development of more solar. And so we would see more of it, right? You know, so, you know, you're essentially giving a real incentive for landlords to put in solar because they would directly see the benefit. But I gotta say is that as of right, commercial solar could reduce the amount of accessory solar that we see. And accessory solar has additional benefits, biggest of which is resiliency and redundancy. If you have accessory solar, that never goes to the grid, it should still work if and when the grid fails. And that's a real benefit that is lost with a commercial system. Accessory usually provides higher total economic benefits. So very simply, and I'm oversimplifying, sales to the grids are usually for much less than the retail cost of electricity. So if you're getting your power directly from the solar panels, you're going to have a much lower electric bill than if, you know, that is than the amount a commercial solar installer would get for this, right? So when you sell to the grid, you get for less than what you would pay for retail use. And then there are, you know, but you know, the real problem is that there are currently very few incentives for accessory solar for the landlord, especially in rent stabilized buildings, right? In rent stabilized buildings, what is the incentive for a landlord to put in solar? And it's a significant problem. And then finally, you know, do we want to install unrelated commercial uses on people's homes? Yeah, I talked to an environmental justice group this morning about this, and they were saying, you know, the point of environmental justice is that people who are affected by a use should see the benefit. And if they are cut out of the loop and still having to pay full rate on their electricity bill, they were saying that could be a problem. And then finally, in more marginal markets, could commercial solar become the 21st century taxpayer? Think about a market like, you know, not in CB6, but out in the boroughs where market rate development isn't quite there. And if you want to have something, you know, you want to land bank some property, you could put a solar farm on it to essentially pay the taxes. But then you're ultimately competing with a residential use with a solar farm, which I don't think anybody wants. So I know there were a bunch of questions that were made. I'm just going to summarize them here. The ones I heard, there will be more, I'm sure. I asked some of these questions when I met with DCP, so I was just going to throw them out there. Are solar canopies being developed to address street walls and setbacks? So DCP wants 100% coverage. However, they seem to be open to the idea of keeping them out of the setback. So this building right here is a tower. It hasn't started its application process yet. It is designed to follow the rules as they are intended right now. And you see this little solar hat on it. And it extends over the edge of the building. That's because there's a 10-foot setback on this building. And so it extends 10 foot over the edge of the building, which I gotta say, it looks kind of odd because this is not a New York City building form. When you go taller, you essentially, with sky exposure planes and setbacks, it's usually a smaller building at the top. And in this case, you have this big canopy, which makes it look larger. So it doesn't look, it looks odd to me because it doesn't follow the New York City building form. And so they are open to the idea of keeping it inside the building wall, but they still want to have 100% on top of the building. How can we ensure that the energy reduction options are not coupled with outdated systems like window air conditioning units? DCP seemed to think that this was best done with local laws and not in zoning. They said they could do it in zoning, but it's not necessarily the best place for it. I've got to agree with them. I think that local laws requiring buildings to have certain levels of efficiency are more appropriate for local law than in zoning. Zoning is typically much more of a blunt tool, and it's a lot of, it's why we have building codes and local laws. Should there be a fundamental change to make cross ventilation mandatory, at least encourage it? To me, this seems out of the scope of this particular zoning text amendment. It could perhaps be a building code improvement. Another thing that Sandy told me was CB6 is currently talking about developing sustainability and resiliency goals. you know, the idea of combining those sustainability and resiliency goals with zoning could be part of implementation. So if there are sustainability and resiliency goals that relate to any of these zoning text amendments, you can either adopt the zoning text amendments or approve of the zoning text amendments or suggest changes to them that would help you adopt your sustainability and resiliency goals. And then there were some positive comments about the affordable housing in new construction, the idea of, you know, all new construction would have some amount of affordable housing, which is how it works in most jurisdictions, but not New York City. But there were questions about implementation ownership versus rentals. This has always been a difficult thing. It's easy to do affordable housing and rentals. It's much harder to do for ownership units. It's something that HPD currently struggles with. There are some programs for it. It's not unheard of, but it's very uncommon and difficult to do. And then finally, DCP is looking for ideas and concerns. They said that comments do not need to be formal or adopted by the full board, since this is outside the formal land use process. And comments can come from in any form from anyone. And they gave us a person and an email address, so you don't have to just dump it in the general box. I'll give this deck to the committee, and so you can take it from there. Oh, and then finally, Sandy asked me to just be prepared to talk about BLAST, which is the Building and Land Use Approval Streamlining Task Force. There were some things that over the past month that has become clear is that there are no changes to the charter that they're considering. So that means that ULURP would remain unchanged, because you can't change ULURP without changing the charter. But the one thing that they did say, and then they are going to try to do, and I mean they, DCP, is they're going to try to get more information on applications to the board before ULURP starts, so that you could have more meaningful input early in the process before it certifies, which is when it's easier to make a change, right? It's hard to make a change on a certified application for everyone that's involved. And if you're able to get input early, you could actually influence the project more than if you comment during ULURP. And so I see it as a possibility of best of both worlds, where you still have your formal comment period and you can still put all of your concerns in writing, but you have an opportunity to weigh in earlier. That's all I have in terms of new stuff. I think I want to hand it back to you and see if there are more questions that need discussion.
All right. I think we have a few questions. I'm going to lead with two very quick questions, and I see Anne has her hand raised. So talking about the energy and zero carbon for a start, you mentioned that solar panels set up on top of residential buildings have to contribute to the residential units themselves. Is there in this text a limit for how much of that energy has to go to the units? Is it just, can they do 10% and sell the rest back to the grid and for the landlord?
Well, okay, so currently it has to serve the residential building, but they want to change the rules so it doesn't have to serve the residential building at all, so that it can be just a completely commercial solar farm.
Got it. So it benefits the landlord, but not necessarily the tenants in the building.
That is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. And the idea is that there aren't that many incentives for landlords to do accessory solar, because, you know, their tenants see the benefit, but they don't see as big of one, right? That's what they're trying to solve, is they're trying to get more solar. That means they try to get more incentives to develop to landowners.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and so that's what their proposal is. It seems to me, because of the benefits of accessory solar, we want more accessory solar, not less of it. And you might actually see less of it by allowing commercial solar to go in all of these places, like in all residential districts.
Got it. Okay, that's an important detail. Another question, which Sandy was also asking about this, is the impact that I mean, we saw that one rendering you had for what that setup might look like on top of the residential building. But is there any consideration for the extended shadow that's going to be cast on neighboring buildings or across the street? Because this is a really high structure.
Well, the structure is going to be limited to 15 feet. On all of, so essentially a story and a half. They have said that zoning for zero carbon will not require an environmental review. It will get a neg deck. They've already said that. And so there will be no study, no shadow study, no shadow impact study, no mitigation for that. So yes, there may very well be shadow effects on neighboring buildings that are unmitigated.
Got it. Okay. So let me turn over to Anne, then I see Larry. Go ahead, Anne.
So Majed, actually you are like teed me up perfectly because I actually have 3 questions, but one of them is really a follow-up in that it seems to me it's like you're presenting this and maybe those are the only 2 regulatory schemes there are, that it's either accessory or it's commercial. But I'm wondering if there isn't a way to kind of have, you know, commercial with incentives so that, you know, like I think about my building where I'm in a rent stabilized apartment, but most of the building is no longer rent stabilized. This landlord is never going to make the investment in solar. Right. And I mean, this is a general issue for sustainable development, is that the developers are the ones who have to make the investment, but it's the tenants, whether they are owners or renters, who benefit from that sustainability in the long term. And so the same thing is true for solar, right? Like we all benefit from it in the long term, but you know, the person who's going to put the capital in. So I'm wondering if there's a way that's somewhere between just accessory and that is going to be, you know, commercial, but, you know, 10% of it, like, but you have to have a meter, you have to have some energy storage on, you know, on site so that the building is a little more resilient than as well. And maybe that's particularly true in flood prone areas. So I just wonder if it might be worth looking at that in a less binary way.
Boy, I think that's a really interesting idea, which I hadn't considered until you talked about it, right? I you know, to me, you know, zoning is a very rigid tool, right? It is either one thing or another, right? But what you're saying is could there be a hybrid? If you want to do commercial, can you make X, Y? You can, as long as you do X, Y, and Z improvements to increase the resiliency of the building, which I think is a really interesting idea here. I think
all right, well,
that's what you want, more solar, but it's hard to get the incentives for it. You're saying, well, you know, split it and get some of the benefits. I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Oh, terrific. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And I mean, I think it's all about, like, you write the legislature to get the legislation to get the incentives that you want. So
right. That's right. So, incentives are all, you know, that comes from legislation.
So that leads to sort of the second question, which I mentioned, and I just am interested in getting a real quick sense of your impression. You know, my biggest concern about all this is the unintended consequences. You know, it's like you write something and it's like, oh, that means people game the system in this way. And I'm just wondering if you had a sense of TCP has a lot of smart people.
They do.
And I am wondering if you get the sense that they are as concerned about that as I am.
Concerned about what specifically?
Unintended consequences, and as they write these, you know, how will people game the system?
Well, I don't think they are as concerned because there's this attitude. Well, you know, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't work or there are unintended consequences, we'll fix it.
We'll change it in 40 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, you remember a lot of these changes that they're putting in right now are follow-ups to, changes that were made in 2012. And then, right, so the zone green was a zoning text amendment we adopted in 2012. And, they're thinking it's not working as well as it can. And so this is, a follow-up to that. So not 40 years, but, 10 years, 8
All
years.
right, well, fair enough. 10 years isn't that long, right? So, okay, so my last question is a complete lurch, which is about the economic opportunity. And I love the idea of kind of blurring the lines in the zoning. I think that as I went by another place that made it through COVID and has a sign up that they are out of business today, which I'm super sad about. I'm wondering, for years, for like as long as we've been talking about Second Avenue subway, we've been talking about the Small Business Job Survival Act, which has stalled and just I don't even know where it's like. I don't even think it got brought up in the legislature this year. But it seems really relevant, and the goals of that legislation seem really relevant to these zoning text amendments. And so I wonder if you have a sense of if they're kind of orthogonal, but if anybody's talking about that stuff.
I don't know if people really are. I mean, right now, because zoning for zero carbon is first, it's getting a lot more attention than the others. And I gotta tell you, I didn't quite realize how mature the idea is. I mean, it's basically already baked. Whereas, the zoning for housing, like that's still way open, right? and it's, zoning for economic opportunity is kind of in the middle. And so I haven't been following it as closely as zoning for zero carbon. And it hasn't just been knowing that this is imminent.
Right.
And that they got to get comments in, it just hasn't been occupying my mind as much. So I can't really comment.
All right. Well, just put it in the back of your head as it bubbles up.
Yep.
Thanks, George. Thanks, as always, for all your terrific work.
It's a great comment. Great comments.
All right, passing on to Larry, then Jim.
Okay, thank you. George, did you get any response to the idea of putting solar panels on the sides of buildings? For example, we have a lot of skyscrapers which have far more square footage on their sides than they do on their roofs. And their roofs have many utilities already installed up there.
So you can currently do that. You can currently install solar panels on the sides of buildings, and they're not suggesting changes to that. The issue ends up being is that if you have a maximum sized building envelope, if you put something on the outside of it, it may not be a permitted obstruction, and that's where you would run into issues. But my understanding in talking with people who do solar installations is that the value is really the roof, because it generates a lot more electricity on the roof than it does on the side of the building. I don't understand the physics of it, Larry, but that's what the Solar One people and others who do this sort of thing, they put it on the roof and not on the sides.
There's another concern that kind of worries me relating to the commercialization, and that relates to the sale of the roof for the solar panels. I see a kind of a Wild West a situation like we had with our cell phone towers, where salespeople would go up to building owners, building managers, offering them free money, and basically, and now to address Ann's concern, the building really serves no great purpose in terms of sustainability relating to what you defined as auxiliary use, where electricity can be transmitted a very short distance, can also be stored, and also can be an emergency backup, which really should take precedence over the leasing of rooftops just to stick down a few panels, but where the landlord will get a couple of bucks, probably not what it's really worth, but they'll pay nothing out of pocket, and so it meets the criteria of free money, found money. Not necessarily overall the best approach. For solar towers, we did need to have particular locations, and so once the landlords realized that they were in a key spot, they were in a position to get a fair return. But in the beginning, they were giving away the rooftop space, and I'm concerned that there's a lack of information here about what commercialization actually is going to look like. And I support what Ann was saying, and that is we need to craft regulations with the intention of providing a benefit to the residents of the buildings where these solar arrays will be attached.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, there's one last thing that I wanted to raise, and this is something that lawyers will eventually find an interesting question. There's been in New York City for a long time no expectation that you have access to sunlight to come into your apartment windows or views. And in order for a solar array to be operable, you have to have unimpeded access to the sun. If you're in the shadow of a building, or the shadow is there for maybe half the day, and then sun for another part of the day, it may not be feasible or worth the investment in solar arrays. How has that been looked at? Because we have a jagged roof line in Manhattan, for example.
Well, it certainly hasn't been looked at in zoning. This has nothing to do with orientation or protection or right to light. I know Sandy and I were talking a little bit about laws in the UK, and the UK has this, right to light, which if you had access to sun for a long period of time, you have access to the sun in the future, which is kind of like completely opposite of the way we do things in New York. But my understanding is that no one is contemplating any changes, and that the market will dictate. And if there is a marginal rooftop that doesn't get much sun, it probably won't get developed. And if there is a building that blocks sun to a rooftop that is developed, well, that probably won't be improved, and it will probably be eventually taken down. I don't think there's anybody is contemplating any other change. But if that's a comment, and you can think about how you would do that, I encourage you to think about including that into your comments.
Well, this is actually a risk for let's say a co-op that wants to make the investment in providing the power and auxiliary and backup for the residents, and then 5 years hence, the tenement next door comes down, and a big skyscraper goes up between that building and the sun, rendering the rooftop worthless.
Yeah, I mean, zoning analysis or knowing what could happen there in the future. It should be something that everybody who's thinking about this sort of stuff should, look into. But, zoning also changes too. So that's not even a complete protection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Jim? You're on mute.
Good evening, George.
Hi, Jim.
Thank you for doing this. Just a couple of quick questions. These are voluntary standards, correct? For the time being? The election,
Voluntary.
voluntary in that you're not required to
Oh,
impose them.
Yes, right.
So
You don't have to do solar or
Right.
wind or anything, right?
For the time being, because they have this other thing, the grading of your carbon status by the
Yes.
city.
Yes.
Now, if you have the potential to have these installed and you don't have them installed, will it affect your grading for the city standards, potentially subjecting you to fines?
I haven't looked into that because that's not zoning. But it's a great question, right? How can the city use local laws and other incentives to get people to do the right thing? I think that's something to look into.
And the other thing is, you may recollect back, I guess it was the early 80s. I'm not really sure. I don't remember precisely. You may remember the Pan Am helicopter that came off the Pan Am building and killed a bunch of people.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
And I'm looking at, I live in a 32-story tower, and we have the potential for solar arrays on the top of the building. And I can well imagine a 30, 40 mile an hour wind tearing loose one of those panels and coming down, or several of them, and coming down and killing somebody. And I'm wondering, is there I think there's going to need to be some kind of how can I say it, limitation to the damages that could be incurred for wrongful death in such a situation, if the city's going to put these panels as either as an incentive or as a mandate. That's going to need to be addressed. And the third thing is, this is kind of going to kill the concept of a tar beach, right? Tar beach where you go sun yourself on the rooftop.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is that the Department of Buildings currently, they have an inspection requirement. They have a process for installing these things now, because they're currently legal now. They're just limited. And so there is a process in place that, in theory, ensures that they're safe. But I'm not attesting it for it, but I'm saying there is already something in there that reviews it.
Yeah, there was a photo that was shown earlier, I think, during your presentation of it raised probably, I guess, 15 feet in the air off the rooftop, and it looked rather flimsy, frankly.
It does. I will say I agree with you. It looks incredibly fragile. Yeah. But it got a building permit. It got inspected. An inspector signed off on it and said it was safe, at least build up to code. So that's why, that's how we do things here, right? We do things according to these codes that we develop, and we don't know that there's something wrong with them until there's a tragedy.
And then we go back and fix it again.
Yeah, and then we go back and fix it. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So, George, did you have any comments on the economic opportunity and the housing zoning code text amendments, or did you cover all the updates? Because I have a couple of questions to ask, if not.
I didn't have anything else on those two. I also didn't learn anything new about those two.
Got it. So then the questions are, and I know these were outstanding from last month, specifically about housing. We had talked about the MIA, the 80%, and whether that average was being revisited. And we talked about the 20% percentage of affordable housing. So I'm just curious whether in the last meeting, which happened since our last meeting, I believe it was October 27th is when that meeting was held by DCP. I wonder if they shared any new updates about these numbers.
They did not. There have been no new numbers shared with that. Right now, it's still being called an update of or an expansion of the existing AIRS program, which is 80%, 80% of AMI, 20% the units. But that program is on suspension because it doesn't work, and so that suggests that they're going to make changes to it. And so, if you have numbers in mind, I encourage you to provide those comments to DCP.
Got it. And with that same, is that the same comment you have about unit sizes as well, and the 680 square foot average?
So I did ask them when I met with them, did they do any analysis of, so in 2016, they lowered the unit size to 680 feet in R7 and R8 districts. And I was like, well, what happened? And they were like, we don't know. We haven't done that analysis. That would be a good idea to do that analysis. Meaning, like, did they produce smaller units? But they didn't do the analysis.
Got it. That sounds like a very important analysis to do before we can weigh in on whether, average unit size should be lowered or tempered with at all. Sounds like something DCP would want to look into and just see.
Exactly. I think that there's a lot to be said for making decisions looking at data.
Right. And I was at DCP for a short period, some 5 years ago. So I know there's a lot of ambition, maybe not as many resources to go with these. But maybe, so I guess my last question on this is, how can us as a committee be most helpful to this process? Do we just draft a series of questions and email them to the contact you shared from planning, or is there a better format?
Well, it sounded like when I was talking to them, when I specifically asked the question, well, how do you want the comments? And they don't want you guys adopting a resolution and sending in formal comments. They want the ideas in their raw form. Because, ultimately, if there's a resolution with a lot of whereases and all that, they feel like it might not, some of the ideas might get lost or end up on the cutting room floor. They want to see what you have to say. Because when you're doing stuff like this, it's all about you have your own biases, right? And getting people who see things completely different can be really useful. And I take them at their word. They really do want to see your comments, and they want to make these things better. So I would say, write up your comments, get some consensus among folks. And even if you don't get consensus, you could say, well, some people think that this is an issue, and that's good enough.
Okay, that's good to know. And questions don't really need consensus, I feel, because we're just asking for more information. So we're not agreeing or disagreeing.
Right.
Okay, that's good to know. These are all the questions that I had and that Sandy also had provided. Does anybody else have any questions for George while we have his time still? And we can keep you all night, George. I literally have a giant document in front of me, but I'm going to share you and just see if anybody else has questions. Okay, seeing none, maybe we can take a stab.
Majed, I'm sorry. It does look like Ronnie White, who is not a member of this committee, but is a member of this board. It looks like she has been waiting for the floor.
Okay, go for it, Ronnie.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for this presentation. The only thing that I can immediately sticks out in my mind is that rendering looks like something that you would see as like a before or like what not to do, especially considering that for the last few years, integrated glass panels are used for any sort of building fenestration and to create curtain wall that is integrated with solar laminated into the glass. So if you look at, something like One Vanderbilt or a couple of buildings in Times Square, think One Times Square, they utilize this technology upgrade with all the materials that have been upgraded as well to
Can you repeat what the technology is again?
the
Just so I can write it down
the
and learn a little
glass.
bit more.
Yes, in any sort of fenestration, any sort of window can is already the tech. It's already at an enterprise and commercial, availability that the uh, PVC, the solar panels, the cells actually are laminated into the glass. So this is used in commercial structures already. So
Okay.
going zero should be the the number one goal of this committee and of CB6. It will allow for um, the development of everything that we've been trying to work for on the various committees. And it would allow for development at ways that would be good for the environment and, putting some other things be good for small local businesses. So nobody, I can't believe that design was approved where they had this canopy just hanging over. And
Well, it hasn't been approved yet. It was
yeah,
part
because
of the
they're gonna change it. They're definitely gonna change it. It's kind of
Well,
like it's like a before, and then they're gonna unveil something, and on the curtain wall, that's where all the solar array is going to be, but it's going to be embedded in tile and in the glass and in windows, and also even if this is for the entire city, well, reaching out, there are more proper roof lines with shingles. And guess what? There's commercial availability for roof shingles that have solar panels built into it, and you still have the same look of just a roof. So, I think it's premature and to assume that we're going to have like this array of dark panels like covering the city. Technology in materials has advanced, and it would allow for that to be used and be more economic for the developers and for the city. So it makes a big difference. It's just like a phase change. But thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. George, I don't know if you have any comments. I know cost prohibitiveness is a concern, and that maybe embedded PVs in glass. I'm an architect, so I know from practice that it does not generate as much as proper PVs
okay.
installed. I'm curious.
Well, I just Googled it and I see that it is a product, but that building that I showed is a 100% affordable senior housing with averaging 40% of AMI. So I'm not sure that it's going to pencil out.
And so that would be incentive to make something that's, great.
Mm-hmm.
And that utilizes the new innovations so that it's cheaper to operate and cheaper to build, and not just, have a moniker, oh, it's affordable housing for seniors. Oh, it's affordable housing for homeless people. Put something, make the structure be about something, not just, the same old, same old.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's a great comment. And I think there's also been a lot of, buildings for affordable housing are still buildings, right? They should have certain standards and that we should accept in should accept no less than certain standards, and it's just setting what those standards are. And so I encourage you all to put together some, good, strong comments, give them to DCP, especially about the things that are missing. Like, this is the first time I'm not an architect, I'm not a designer, I do zoning. And so I hear about things from you all, right? And you all told me about photovoltaic glass, which I didn't know about. And I'm sure that the planners are learning inside DCP about these things, but they're not designing buildings either, right? And so you're going to know more about the actual practice of this and what's being done. And so put your comments in and hear what they have to say.
Great. All right. Thank you, George. Sorry, go ahead, Brendan.
Just wanted to also quickly flag Dina Elkin from Solar One's comment in the Q&A saying that it's not her area of expertise, but her understanding is that future development around an installation, how likely it may be, is part of what is figured out during a solar assessment. So just wanted to flag that.
Great. Thank you for that. So as a next step, I can volunteer to just combine our questions that we have, and we have quite a few, so maybe we can clean them up and just merge a few together. And maybe next month's, well, we don't have a December committee meeting, so in January's meeting, we can just go over them, and if there are no objections to those, we can go ahead and submit. All right, so with that, thank you so much again, George, for your time, and this was extremely helpful. And you'll provide the updated slides, my guess is, to Brandon, so those can be shared, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I will do that.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank
Great
you
seeing
again.
you all. Okay.
All right, great seeing
Bye.
you. Bye. All right, so jumping on to the next point, actually, I'm going to turn it over to Laureen to just introduce herself real quick. Just as a reminder, Laureen is our planning fellow for this year. I have a quick introduction to read through, but I'll let her introduce herself more in detail. But Laureen is actually following up on work that was done by our last community planning fellow, Kiran Mika-Malloy, which was done 2021, 2022. She's currently pursuing her graduate studies, and she is based here in New York. She's going to be working on, this is like really a part-time thing while she's doing her master's. There's a number of interests on resiliency, green infrastructure, waterfront projects. That's why this committee is the perfect place for her to do the work. And actually, with that, Laureen, turning it over to you just for a quick intro.
Yeah. Hi, good evening, everyone. So yes, I'm Laureen Makar. I'm the planning fellow for this community board, and I'm pursuing my master's in Hunter College in urban policy and leadership, and mostly focusing on environmental resiliency and green infrastructure. So yeah, like we mentioned, I feel like this is the perfect placement for me for that. I have been going through the previous planning fellows report, which, like we mentioned, was really well done. And they had mentioned that in the original 197A plan, it lacked any recommendations around sustainability or environmental resiliency. So I thought that that was the perfect place to build on. So for now, right now, it's still in the very beginning stages. So obviously everything is subject to change. But for now, I'm thinking of focusing on 3 specific areas in terms of recommendations around sustainability for the 197A plan. And those areas being focusing on recommendations for development on the solo lot, recommendations for green infrastructure projects for above 25th Street along the East Coast. That goes beyond the boundary of the East Side Coastal Resiliency Plan. And the third thing would be kind of doing a survey of the vacant lots in the community district, and maybe kind of pinpointing the ones that present opportunities for green infrastructure like bioswales or rain gardens and things like that. There's also the idea of, you had mentioned in a previous committee meeting that I watched the video for, a parking lot under the FDR Drive between 18th Street and 23rd Street. There was the idea of turning that into an open green space. And I was thinking of also incorporating that and building on that. But yeah, these are all those very beginning stages. So if anyone has any ideas or recommendations, I would love to hear them.
Great. Thank you, Laureen. And before I turn it over, just to give a quick timeline for Laureen's engagement with the committee. February 3rd there's a midpoint check. So we're still in early stages, but the next couple of months is really where we take on the work. April 28th is the final presentation. So any work or research that Laureen takes on has to wrap by end of April. Ideally, she gets to present to the committee once or twice. And it would be great if she can present to the full board towards the end of that, just show them what is our committee working on, what have we came up with. If we are coming up with direct recommendations, not just research, that would be even better. If we can point to any pilot projects, and I know Laureen's expertise also coming from a perspective on looking at policy, seeing how other community districts have approached these issues, which are really common. We're not the only district that's in flood zone, even though a majority of our district is within that. So these are the milestones to keep in mind. So I'll open the floor if anybody has any questions to Laureen. Please go for it. And Anne, maybe this would be also a good time to talk about, I see your hands raised. Go for it, Anne.
No, Majed, go ahead, please finish your.
I was just going to say this would be a good time also to talk about how this work can complement the work of the last fellow that we had, who was here before I was. So I got to read that amazing work, and I think it's really great, but we have to build on it.
Yeah. And actually, I was really just gonna say, welcome to Laureen, and I think that you're right. I mean, I think that your interests seem, really aligned with our concerns. My question to you really is, I found like there were so many pages on here, and so it was like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm just wondering if there were any things I know you had gone through his report, if there were things that really caught your attention and that you felt like, yeah, like that's something I really kind of want to follow up on. So it was more along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned, the solo lot, that's going to be one area that I'm going to focus on. I think that space is really interesting because it's not very common to find such a big vacant lot anymore in the city, that there's so many like opportunities available. Obviously, it's going to depend on like zoning and the land use of that area, but I think that it presents some good opportunities for like affordable housing development, something maybe similar to the Essex crossing that the previous planning fellow had mentioned in their report also as a sort of kind of case study to follow the example of. But if that isn't feasible, then I think that it's also a good opportunity for some green infrastructure projects in that space also.
Go ahead, Larry.
The thing that we have to keep in mind about the Solo site is that it is privately owned.
Right.
And that's a big difference in comparing it to the Essex Crossing, which was controlled by the city. And even though it wasn't developed for 40 years, it was owned by the city and subject to the city planning. What Mr. Solo or his estate will do with this property really is something that we don't have any immediate impact on, although there was a negotiated agreement a few years ago, which expressed what at least this community board was looking for. And have you had a chance to look at that?
Well, that was actually a question that I had wanted to bring up. If anyone from the community board had been in contact with the private owner, or if they had any idea of what the owner was intending to do with that space.
Well, personally, I have no idea. Brendan or Jesus, have you any intelligence on this?
I do not.
No, we've not been in contact with this. We generally would not reach out to a stakeholder like that unless we've been instructed to do so by the committee or by the chair of the board or executive committee.
So then to clarify, Larry, the agreement or the understanding you're mentioning is that you're referencing, where can this be found?
Well, this was Lou probably has a better recollection of the negotiation of this. That was around the time that I joined the board, maybe about a dozen years ago. And the city councilman who was behind this is now in charge of planning. It's Dan Gorodnik.
Lou, can you share a little bit on that?
I have a very limited memory of what was happening. My understanding was that the UN wanted to construct a building on what is now the Robert Moses Playground, and
that's different. That related to the building the walkway out in the river. This is
Larry, I can speak to it. This is Molly. Yeah, they have built the building across opposite of the Solo site now. So that was about, you're right, maybe 12 to 15 years ago. So it's very long, that I check in with the property owner like probably once a year, a couple times a year, and their legal team and publicity folks, their public relations firm, continues to say that there are no plans for that site. But if there were plans for that site at this point, they would be required to build as we approved, as city planning approved, again, 12 plus years ago. The plans that we reviewed and the city reviewed and approved, they would be required to build similarly, the 3 buildings and the open space, and the office has those plans on file. I don't know, I could send them to the office if they don't have them, but Jesus, do you have those still on file? I'm sure we have them.
I'd have to look for them. The archives that we got, some things were there, others were not, and so we'd have to look for them. If you happen to have them handy,
I do. Okay,
sending them to the office would be good.
So Lorraine, this is exactly what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's not a whole heck of a lot we can do since it's privately owned.
It's showing its detail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be helpful to look through those, especially with rumors, but not really rumors. Like this was a news that was posted that the owners of that lot have considered pitching it for one of the multiple casino locations that are proposed in the city. So they have not confirmed it. Nothing on their website says it. It was just a website that posted it, and I know Sandy it was forwarded to Sandy as a news article. So it would be good to compare. If there's any changes, then they'll probably come through the committee, and this is where we can make any suggestions or proposals for, specifically as it relates to environmental sustainability plans. Letty, I know you had your hand raised, but you lowered it. Was your question answered?
No, I was going to say that the site was developed as a large scale zoning plan, and as Molly said, he completed the buildings on the west side of First Avenue. The lot on 35th Street where the school is and the bronze building, that property he sold. And they're just sitting now with this other lot, and it's his, and Molly was 100% correct.
Right. Yeah. And actually, Sandy and I were looking it up. So the fact that they worked on the American Copper buildings, which are what you're
Right.
referring to, and the fact that 685 First Avenue, that's
Right.
the black building on the west side of First Avenue. In fact, both of those were worked on means that their license has not expired despite so many years having passed, because this was a master plan for multiple sites and they have
Right.
done on them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I should note that Ronnie White, who is a member of CV6 but not this committee, has raised her hand.
All right, let me see if there are any other comments or questions from the committee to Laureen on the work that we're going to do. So we have not shared a lot of details, and maybe this will come in the next committee meeting with at least a brief few sentences of what is the research focusing on. And next Friday, Laureen and I are going to take a walk along basically do a site visit along the waterfront of our entire district, just to do some cognitive mapping. What are some sites, what are areas we can look at that have changed significantly in the past couple of years, especially with construction underway south of 23rd. So hopefully we'll have more updates by next month. All right, if there are no more comments or questions, Brendan, if you can, oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne. You're on mute, Anne.
Sorry, I have two things that neither of them are from myself. And one of them, like, hey, Ronnie, speak up. Ronnie had pointed me to something that I thought all of us might be interested in. That
She's on. We can give her the mic if you want. If you have any.
Yeah, Ronnie. So
otherwise,
if
I'll
you
hand it over to her.
Okay. And the other thing, there's somebody else who I believe is still a participant here, Bob Lang or Robert Lang, who also had an idea that I thought was interesting for the board for the committee to hear. I don't know, Brendan, if he's still here.
Okay, let's actually, should we hear from Ronnie if we're on this issue, and then we
definitely
can go ahead, Ronnie.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to I can't wait to hear what you're going to say, but I wanted to say welcome, Lorraine, and also please look into permeable concrete for the waterfront and for the new developments, and so that it can be applied in a manner to get rid of all sewer grates, and so that they don't get clogged and contribute to flooding, and so on and so forth. So again, welcome. And
thank you.
And I welcome.
No, Ronnie, it was supposed
Yes.
to be about the street design manual.
Oh, yes, of course. Duh. Right. Street design. Hey, Sus, I hope we have the latest version of the oh my gosh, what is it called, Anne? My mind just went blank.
The street design manual. Save it for transportation next week.
Okay, so let's put a pin in it, actually see if Bob has any comments on this issue. Otherwise, we'll say thank you to Laureen and just move over for the agenda. Go ahead, Bob.
I don't know what issue we're on, but as I mentioned to Anne in the past, walking around the area of the district, there are many above ground parking lots. And I've always thought that the city or whomever could go to whomever owns those parking lots and offer to develop the site with low income, middle income, whatever housing, and work a deal with the owner of the parking lot to give them below ground parking rights at some reduced charge or whatever. And the city would have access to all kinds of open space to build housing. Now, I don't know much about zoning or how the city operates or anything, but
Noted. Okay.
that was my idea.
All right.
Probably very impracticable. People have to have money to do that and everything else, but
Yeah, wish the city had a lot more resources.
yes.
Okay, so with that, then I'm seeing no more comments for Laureen. Thank you, Laureen, again, and we'll be back for next month to give a quick review of the work. So I'm just going to jump to the next, just to keep it going. I'm realizing it's 8:20. The next item on the agenda at this point, because we merged also discussion of the last report, is the chair's report. So Jesus, should I go to that?
Sure, if you're ready to, yes.
All right. So very briefly, just 2 points in the chair's report. Solar One opening along the stretch 18 to 23rd is postponed. We heard from the Department of Design and Construction, DDC, about this just last week. Their statement is that after having further conversations with EDC and Solar One, DDC have decided to keep the northern portion of the Stuyvesant Cove Park closed until early next year, when the contractor can open the full portion of the park north of East 20th Street. And the reason, I mean, as a background reminder, we as a committee, we have discussed this and we are in support of this decision, mainly after hearing from Solar One about concerns about safety. Dina Elkin, I know, is I saw she posted a question, so I don't know, Dina, if you have anything to add here on this issue.
It looks like she's left.
She left. Okay, perfect. Then this was just an update. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Majed, does anybody recollect whether in this Solar 2 building that we reviewed, I guess, 2 meetings ago, was there any discussion of restrooms in that facility? I don't remember seeing one.
Yeah, there are actually 3 restrooms on the 2nd floor.
Okay.
And there's no elevator, so
publicly accessible.
Publicly accessible. I believe they will have operating hours just like any other park. Yeah, which is much needed because we don't have that many public restrooms in our district.
No, we don't. I don't.
Yeah. Okay. The second item, I guess, related is the Solar 2 resolution. I recall Sandy said she will draft that resolution. We are in support after the presentation from the architects last month, and Anne was going to support on that. So, Anne, any updates on that resolution, or should we wait for next month to hear from Sandy?
I have not seen a draft. My plan was to provide editing support, but I haven't seen a draft, so I don't know. And I don't think Sandy is in the country, so I guess I'm not expecting to see one.
Okay, so next month it is. And
Yeah.
Jim, go for it.
No, I did see the draft of the resolution. Sandy had worked on it. Apparently it was expedited because something else of EDC needed to do. Yeah, so the resolution was fine as written, but failing to have a quorum tonight, I don't see that we can vote on it. So but it was fine as written.
Well, wait, I mean, if Molly takes off her, puts her camera on, do we have quorum? I mean, we haven't seen the reso.
Maybe it's better to hold off till next month until Sandy is also present to discuss it, since she's worked on it. Go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify, is it a separate resolution that the committee is talking about? Because I know that at November's full board meeting, a resolution was passed on the preliminary design for Solar 2. So I just wanted to clarify that. Maybe I'm confusing this with something else.
I do not know the answer to that. All the more reason to consult with Sandy, who has offered to take the lead on drafting a resolution on the October 26th meeting. So maybe we'll hold off and continue that conversation next month. Okay. So with that, the last item in old and new business is I want to share with everybody the Spatial Equity NYC website, a website developed by Transit Alternative, which I don't know if folks are familiar with. I'm going to share my screen just for 1 minute so you get to see that. This is the website, and I'll put in the chat to everybody the link. It's spatialequity.nyc. It's a really great tool that we can use to see city data, how we can use it, where does our district stand in terms of a number of items related to.
Majed, I'm not seeing that. Is everybody else seeing?
Can you? No, you're not able to see my screen. Let's try again. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So let me take a step back. Spatial Equity NYC is a website developed by Transit Transportation Alternatives, a really cool entity. If you're not familiar with their work, they have this really cool tool that I believe we can benefit from to better first educate on the standing of our district. You know, what are the facts about where we stand in comparison to the city on a number of items. So very simply, if you go to citywide data, you'll see a ranking, for example, here on council districts ranked by bus lanes. And these are council districts. Our community district is 2, 4, and 5. So literally the top 3 in the number of bus lanes and bus infrastructure, which is really great. But once we switch to some other items, and you can use this drop-down menu to see about speeds, traffic volumes, public seating, those numbers vary widely. Now, granted, I have some bias because they're using some NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials graphics, and I worked there for 4 years. But this is something, there's no really resolution or anything to pitch here, just a really cool tool that I thought we would share with you all, that Sandy actually passed on to me. We can discuss more in future meetings, but just, a cool tool to have on your radar. Again, this is spatialequity.nyc. You can click around and we can take it up in future meetings. So with that, if there are no other comments, I will ask for a motion to adjourn and let everybody have a great evening.
So moved. It's Letty, so moved.
All right.
Second, if you need one. Majed, thanks again for leading a very interesting meeting.